Good morning, everyone, again. Let's start off again. And for those of you that might have just joined, again, my name is Bharucha and have been within the talent acquisition and talent management space for over 2 decades. We will talk about how we build your personal brand, and that's going to be a key element as part of your job search strategy as you move into roles where you're ready to take your next step or to take get into another opportunity or your next challenge. So one of the things we would like to cover today is about the nuclear industry and why a career in nuclear industry would be something that you could explore further. Moving on to our next slide. Thank you. So as we talked about this earlier, Canada has been one of the countries that is seeing a major resurgence as far as the nuclear industry is concerned, because a lot of the reactors that were built are decades old and therefore require refurbishment and or upgrading to newer technology and more advanced technologies. So one of the things that you will find is that the government has very seriously invested in the nuclear power, and of course you will hear that clean power is a very large segment within this industry of power generation. So Ontario definitely is heavily invested. We have some utility companies like OPG, which is Ontario Power Generation, Bruce Power, and of course we have New Brunswick Power as well in Canada. But along with the province of Ontario, you will find that New Brunswick, Quebec, Alberta, and Saskatchewan are very heavily invested in nuclear power and are looking to jump on this bandwagon as well. So certainly what that means then is it sustains thousands of new jobs and creates new jobs. The other advantage for you, those that are looking to enter into the nuclear industry, not necessarily the industry itself, but it means there are many workers in the industry that are reaching retirement age, which provides some unique opportunities for you when about half of these employees are expected to retire in the next 10 years. The industry itself is looking for a lot of talent that is young talent coming into the market and looking to home grow that talent then. So for those of you that may be new grads coming out of maybe an engineering program or a technology program and looking to get into either the technician fields or even for those of you that may be in skilled trades, this allows for a lot of opportunities opening up. Okay. Next slide, thank you. So speaking of what kind of avenues there are to enter this industry, primarily there are 3 facets or 3 segments of this industry that you could consider. One of them is the utilities. So like I mentioned, in Canada, certainly those that stand out in Ontario are OPG and Bruce Power. They have some large facilities that employ thousands of individuals across various kinds of professions, and we'll go into that into the next slide. And we can take a look at what avenues they could have as well. The other channel, sometimes much of a lesser known channel, are professional services and consulting. I personally have worked for one such company for approximately 7 years called SNC-Lavalin. And SNC-Lavalin was a very strong player within the nuclear space and providing consulting services, both engineering as well as construction services to some of these utility companies, as well as have part ownership in some research and development facilities. So that brings me to our next piece or next avenue for you is research and development. Obviously, technologies change, and through further research and development, the government is heavily investing in improving what clean energy will look like in the next decade, in the next 2 decades in Canada. So that to us is, again, a great opportunity. So for those of you that might come from professional bents of maybe scientists, you may have done your PhD, you then progress from there. And research and development could be one of the other areas for you to look at. Next slide, please. Thank you. So looking at what are the kind of careers that you could look at in nuclear? Like I mentioned earlier, you could be in professional services, such as engineers in all kinds of disciplines. In the nuclear industry, they look for civil and structural engineers, electrical engineers. You could be a materials handling engineer, come from a mechanical side, or a very specialized, even though there's nothing that you graduate as nuclear, but there are some programs now available within certain universities that specialize in the nuclear space. And certainly computer systems. One of the key pieces is instrumentation and control, like the little image that I've put up. There's a very heavy involvement of having a lot of controlling that happens through complicated computer systems. And therefore, there is a lot of that is required as well as expertise in that field. Fire protection certainly is another area within, as an engineer, that you could specialize with. But in addition to engineering as professional categories, they could also look at various professions such as project management. When you talk about refurbishing a multi-billion-dollar industry, it means that you are practicing a lot of projects, or you are putting in place a lot of and executing a lot of the projects that need to go in from inception to execution. So project management is a very large space within this industry itself. Obviously very heavily controlled and governed as an industry, and therefore documentation is extremely important. So documentation control is another profession that you could consider. And of course, I do not need to even begin to describe health and safety and how important that would be in the nuclear industry. From a technician standpoint, there could be various technicals. So if you came out of a technical college course and have a technician background or experience within that, again, engineering technicians, maintenance techs, but within the science field itself, there could be chemical, environment protection, because clearly environmental protection is of key importance within the nuclear space. Instrumentation and control, radiation protection, nuclear itself, and being specialized in that space. But in addition to all of these that are more professional, there also are skilled trades, and it's a growing field and somewhere where we clearly see a huge lack in expertise and talent. So when we talk about roles such as carpenters, welders, pipe fitters, heavy equipment operators, we're requiring that kind of talent across all industries there. And construction trades certainly, because a lot of it is going to be refurbishment, as I mentioned, and possibly new builds even across the globe. So what that means is you're looking for a lot more of construction trades and millwrights. Thank you. Next slide, please. So let's start talking about your job search and what that looks like. Within Canada itself, one of the things that you certainly need to think about is what are the kind of roles that are available and how would you prepare yourself for those? So let's start talking about, before you even initiate your application process, what kind of preparation you need to have. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when we talk about preparation to begin your search, my recommendation always is your first step, and this goes before you apply to any job, is start to review job postings. Look at what are the skill sets they are requiring. What is it that would be of interest to you? What percentage of those skills does your experience provide background for and you match? And then you start to build your resume. It's really important, and we'll go into more details in some of the following slides on building your resume and how you incorporate some of the things that you see within your job postings and building that into your resume, still keeping in mind that you're building yourself a unique brand. Using those job postings again, you need to start working on your LinkedIn profile. Very often as recruiters, we not only post a job on our company's career site, but we also use other job boards such as LinkedIn, Workopolis, or industry association websites. And when we do, in addition to all of those, we look for passive talent, people that may not have applied for jobs. So we have the capability of searching LinkedIn. That may not be available to everyone else. And as part of that search, it's important that you have a LinkedIn profile that truly stands out. that catches the recruiter's eye, and we'll get into more details in the following slides on the how. You need to research job boards. There are a variety of job boards, things like Indeed, Glassdoor, LinkedIn themselves. It's important that you start to create for yourself a presence on those job boards and career alerts on those job boards. As a career alert, what that allows you to do is it means you don't have to continually search the career sites. It'll send you an email using certain keywords that you have used for it to match it to your requirements of the job. From a networking perspective, it is one of the most important pieces for you to be able to manage your career and manage your job search. Networking can take various forms. It could use social media. It could use word of mouth. You have an existing network of those that you have worked with in the past, friends and family, and leveraging that network and informing everyone that you are in the market and you're looking for your next opportunity is a really, really important step in starting your entire search. So let's move on to our next slide, where we can start to review more details around how you go about building your resume. It's really important when you hopefully will receive these slides, you can expand it further and go into more detail on the little image that will capture a lot of these pieces. But it's important for you to understand to say you want to keep your resume simple. Don't overcomplicate a resume. Certain things are very outdated, like using an objective statement. So you want to use things that are more of a professional summary, and I call it my elevator speech. So think of it as you have a key decision maker that you have just lucked out with and you're stuck in an elevator with them going up 10 floors. It would probably take you about 30 seconds to reach those 10 floors. You have 30 seconds to be able to introduce yourself. What would you say to the individual? Really important for you to have practiced that so that you know how to describe yourself and what is of interest to you. What is it that's unique about you? We'll get into it in more details in some of the next slides, but it's important that you have a professional summary that encapsulates your experience in top 4 or 5 lines. So one of the things that I want to reinforce as a message to everyone today is consider the first page of your resume prime real estate. Absolutely prime real estate. Your resume should not be more than 2 to 3 pages max. I would strongly advise it to keeping it to 2 pages. Recruiters receive hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes each day. And especially in the market that we are in right now, it's all about demand and supply. So there is a very large supply of talent, unfortunately with everything in COVID. A lot of industries have experienced redundancies, and therefore there is a very large talent pool out in the market. So you want to treat your first page of your resume to be an eye-grabbing tool. Allow somebody to very quickly identify what is the experience that you bring, what are some absolute critical key skills that they find critical. It's not a space where you list off every single job responsibility under each of the roles that you've held. It's really important that you limit that. So when you talk about your work experience, you want to have 4 to 5 bullets max under each of them. And it's not about what you actually did, but it's about what you accomplished in that role. It's about speaking about your achievements. So clearly list your achievements and what you accomplished there. Make sure, which is why it's really important that you read your job posting again, is look at the key words that they have used. Very often now, especially in our current scenario, a lot of talent acquisition professionals, including myself, have been impacted with the redundancies going through across various industries. And as a result, companies are expecting recruitment teams to manage with a much smaller staff, which means you supplement with a lot of technology to allow recruiters to be more efficient and speedy in matching candidates, which means you use artificial intelligence or AI tools. And when you're looking at AI tools, what it does is it matches keywords on the job description with keywords on your resume. And the stronger the match, the greater the chance that the recruiter will open that resume and review it further. So really important for you to start pulling job postings from various organizations in those that match your experience and skills and interest, and then start to look at what those keywords are and incorporate that into your resume. As I mentioned earlier, make sure you speak of specific results of the initiatives you've taken. Very often we find resumes that talk about all the great things they've done, but what it misses out on was what was it that you achieved as a result of it? So what was the result of you having taken an innovative approach to maybe, say, managing a certain process? What did that do for you? Did it make the process more efficient? Did it cut down on some time? What percentage of time or cost did it save? And it's really important that you incorporate all of those elements into building a resume. Next slide, please. So when we talk about building your resume and building your LinkedIn profile, one of the things that you really have to do is sit back, and there needs to be some introspection on your part, thinking of what is unique about you. What is it that you bring? And then thinking of how am I going to use that and market myself? So now I'd ask all of you to take a second and just think of a brand, any brand. It could be a product that you use on a daily basis, but something that you go and you pick up from, let's say you go grocery shopping or you go to the supermarket and you pick it up intuitively. You don't have to give it a second thought. It is a brand that you know is your go-to. It could be your favorite breakfast cereal. Anything that you know. Now think about what makes that brand so unique. Why do you prefer that to others? What is it that they've done? So there's some unique feature about them, but also they've done a lot of marketing and they've marketed themselves really well to you. So you have to incorporate both those elements into building your own brand. Next slide, please. So if you had to think of what makes up a personal brand, what is a personal brand? What does that really mean? It means what is your unique selling proposition? So think about it. What makes you unique? What makes you set yourself apart from your competition? Maybe it could be some really positive feedback that you've received in your past, from your past employers, from your past managers. What have they praised about you? What is it that they really liked about you? So not just technical skills, but also some personal, softer skills, like you being somebody that maybe takes initiative, that drives things forward. You have demonstrated some really strong leadership skills. What is it? And think of what that looks like for you. Again, I come back to your elevator speech. Can you summarize all of that in a top 4 to 5 lines and a 30-second spiel and talking about who you are? What is it that you bring? That becomes the foundation, but it takes a lot of introspection. And you have to review your past experiences, sit down with your resume, go through it in detail, and think about what makes you stand out from the rest. Next slide, please. So when we talk about branding ourselves, social media is one of the key elements that you can use in today's world on branding yourself in the market space. Like I mentioned earlier, as recruiters, we have unique accesses to access various job boards, various social media sites, and look and search for talent that maybe everyone else doesn't. So it's really important that you leverage your brand on social media. Social media can be everything from LinkedIn to your own Facebook page. A lot of professionals have 2 different Facebook pages, one that they use for their personal reference and the other that they create as a professional page. You could use Twitter very effectively in talking about some of the things that you are subject matter experts on. There could be various other tools, and I have seen some really well done videos on YouTube that talks about that individual and the expertise. So maybe it's about a video about you are a subject matter expert on something and you want to share with those that are in your profession something that you have done very successfully. And you talk about that and get more publicity and more market yourself better that way. So really important to start using social media. Branding your social media profile is, again, extremely important. So once you've figured out who you are, what's unique about you, you need to start to bring that flavor, that personality, and that flair in your social media space. It's not only about getting to know you as a professional, but it's also for the recruiter to get to know you as a person. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, let's say you're a skydiving enthusiast. Put that in there. It talks about you and who you are. Talk about, somebody that may be very focused on their family, and that's really important to you. You're not just building a brand that talks about you as a professional, but brand that talks about you as a person, what that looks like. If you are someone that has indulged in a lot of or really participated in a lot of volunteer activity, and you're very passionate about the community, you want that to be seen across your social page. So it's really important that you start to build that profile for yourself. The other piece that I find almost sad is very often people start to wake up after they may have been unfortunate and lost a job to start to think about, oh, I need to build a network. Well, you need to do that all along in your career. It's really important that no matter what level of experience you're at, or whether you are a professional or a tradesperson, it's really important that you have built a presence on social media and started to build a network of your like-minded professionals. So starting to build that network when you are looking for a job might be a little too late in the game. So start now, start early, and continue to build that network. Be active. One of the things that you should all know is that, let's say pages like LinkedIn work on algorithms. So some of the algorithms favor those posts that may have had more likes, comments, they are more active, they share. So it's really important that you are very active. It's not just about liking every comment made by somebody else or every share that someone else has done, but having it gives you an opportunity to provide some really meaningful comments. It allows your network to see the kind of value that you bring into providing that kind of insight and highlighting what your expertise is. Make sure you get recommendations from those that you have worked with. Think of it as a 360-degree review, not only from your managers, but from your peers, from those that, if you're in client-facing roles, from your clients, and even if you are in management capacity roles, from those that have reported to you. Giving somebody a full 360 view of what you are as a person really helps build that image and that you want to portray. It's important, another little tip and trick is to use hashtags in your posts. And if you are commenting on someone else's post, using hashtags, and people follow those hashtags. Next slide, please. So we spoke a little bit about networking. And as that little picture here suggests, one person connected to 4, and that 4 people connected to another 2, and those other 2 connected to. All of a sudden, that one central person now has a network of more than 50 or 60 individuals, just by having connected with 4. That is the power of networking. If you think of it, and I think most of you may have heard of 6 degrees of separation, the premise and the theory there is that each individual knows everyone in the world by just 6 jumps. And through 6 introductions, you would be able to know practically everybody there is to know. So when you think of it from that capacity, it suddenly opens up the entire globe as far as networking is concerned. And it really widens your scope of those that you could start to share ideas and thoughts and concepts with. So widening your network is really important. When you receive invites on LinkedIn, please accept all invites. I find it really strange, especially when HR professionals or recruitment professionals force somebody to provide a LinkedIn an email address to identify whether or not they know them. That is not the meaning of networking. The whole idea of networking is that you build a wider pool of talent. And the more you network, the better the possibilities of you knowing somebody that knows someone else that is looking for someone with your talent. So ask for introductions from contacts to their contacts. That is how you will start to build that wider pool of network. Contacting someone cold is far less successful than when you are introduced by someone that they value and respect. So it's important to try and find those warm leads and get those introductions going. When you connect with that individual, finally, suggest that you connect with them because you're interested in discussing about a common background. Maybe you came from a common company 3 years ago. You may not have worked with them at the same time, but you have some common elements that you want to talk about, or that you're exploring stepping into this industry and would like to be able to talk more about how this industry is growing. What's the trajectory? What does that look like? Please don't connect asking to say, I'm looking for a job. That puts a lot of pressure on the individual, and they will shy away from connecting with you. So you want to make it as non-threatening as you can by saying you're here to network, you're here to talk about and share experiences. You will find much greater success with that. Also inform your network, as I mentioned earlier, about being open to new opportunities. It is really important that more people know about your willingness to be out there in the market and explore opportunities. New slide, please. So let's talk about the final piece here, and that is sometimes the dreaded interview. The more prepared you go in for the interview, the better you will present yourself. So the key in getting a fantastic interview is preparation. Next slide, please. How are you going to prepare for the interview? So really important, again, is that you go in for the interview prepared with having researched the company. The interviewer, look at their profile on LinkedIn. You will suddenly realize going, oh yeah, they worked with this person that I had worked with before and they talked about them. Here is a great opener then for you to talk about and break the ice. Research the industry so that when you have a discussion, and I'm going to emphasize the word discussion, an interview is no longer the interviewer asking you questions and you answering them. It's a two-way discussion that you need to have, because that is your chance to impress upon them the expertise you bring, the knowledge that you have, the amount of industry know-how that you have. And I think that's something that will make you far more successful and make you stand out and shine as opposed to your competition. Please reread the job posting. The number of times that people have applied for jobs and realized that's not for them when they were being interviewed. That means either you never read the job posting in detail, or you go into a job posting having applied for various roles, you don't realize which one you're interviewing for sometimes, and it's far more common than you would think. So really important that you reread the job posting. What that also will allow you to do is identify key experiences and competencies that the employer is looking for. Now, the other piece that's really important, before you go in, at least half an hour before or an hour before the interview, you review your resume again. So again, it's about you finding these experiences and the results that you've achieved so that you can highlight those competencies that the employer needs. It allows you as a memory jogger to say, the job posting required this, I have this, how do I match those? Anticipate the questions and practice your responses to behavioral questions. So you can start to anticipate questions based on experiences that they've asked for or competencies that they've asked for. Let's say if it is a client-facing role and you're going to be asked about a really difficult client that you have worked with. So when you know that that is going to be a requirement of the position, it'll be really important that you start to practice that and think about what are the kind of questions they'll ask me. If you know what you can expect, you can stay prepared by practicing those responses. In a behavioral interview, you will be asked questions that expect you to provide an example of a specific time when you may have faced a certain situation. So the expectation is that you talk about what that situation was, what is it that you had to do. So think of it as an acronym of STAR. What was the situation? What was the task? What was the challenge in that? What happened? What action did you take? So what did you do? How did you go about doing it? Why did you choose to do it that way? And then finally, don't forget to end with saying, what did it achieve? What was the end result of that whole thing? Here is your, again, opportunity to shine, because you're going to talk about, you're setting the stage of what happened. You're talking about what action you took and how you actually contributed to the success of it. So always make sure that you answer and keep that acronym at the back of your mind as you answer these questions. Again, this is not something you go into unprepared. You go in with having practiced this. Do it with a friend. Do it with a peer. One of the other big misses that I find is people not being prepared with truly insightful questions. This is another opportunity to demonstrate how much you understand the industry and how well you understand the role. Think about questions that you want to ask the interviewer. It can also be an opportunity for you to then connect with the interviewer on a different level. So allow yourself some time in advance, again, having reread that job posting, think of it as what is it that you want to ask about the culture of the organization, the place you're going to work at, the progression, how the industry might be progressing, and how do you see career opportunities becoming available in that progression for you, for your career growth. So think of what it will be that would make you, again, stand out from your competition there. Next slide, please. So then during the interview, some little pieces, and it might seem very obvious that I'm stating the obvious here, but at the same time, it's very often that these little misses is what helps create a bit of a negative illusion for the interviewer, and you come away with not being someone that goes through a glowing interview. So let's talk about the obvious. Be on time, preferably a few minutes early. Dress professionally. Also be very mindful of your body language. You communicate nearly 80% of what is communicated is through body language. Only 20% is through your words. So you need to not only sound confident, but look confident. You come across as being fully present. When the interviewer is asking a question, clearly have some listening body language and signs to indicate that you're interested, you're listening to what they're saying, especially when they're describing what the role is, what the culture of the organization is, or the space that you would be working in. Again, ask insightful questions and ask about next steps, what that looks like. So you want to ask a closing question at the end of it that talks about what are the next steps? Are there any things that you have as concerns when you've spoken with me? It'll give you an opportunity to clarify something that the interviewer may not have fully delved into. Now, in our world today, as in this session, a lot of it is virtual interviews because with COVID, a lot of the organizations are not currently functioning where they're in the office. So very often you might have interviews that are in video conferences. So much like you experienced this morning, or we experienced this morning, it's important to test your technology in advance. So I'll take this opportunity to apologize that we didn't have the chance to do that. But at the same time, it's really important that you set up and look at yourself in how it comes across in the camera. Really important that you don't blend into your background. Have a clutter-free background, preferably a blank space, so that it doesn't distract the interviewer. And I realize not everyone would have an opportunity to have a home office, but wherever you are in your home, and if you're working out of your home or you're at home, ensure that you have a clutter-free background. Sit facing a light source. So much like you see in this picture here, the lady who is on the other side of the screen is somebody that is facing a window. There is a lamp there. Don't have a light source behind you, because what that would do is to darken your face and make it really hard for the interviewer to see you. So sit facing a light source. Be in a quiet setting without distraction. Really important to have that, but at the same time, I think with COVID and with people working from home now, for those of us that could, it was one of the things that I think most employers have learned is to deal with little heads poking in, with kids running in, or pets making some noise, and it's inevitable. But I think it would be very professional if you talked about that to say, I'm sorry, right now, just in case you hear a little bit of a distraction or noise, this is what's happening in home. Most of them are very understanding and very accommodating to that. One of the things that seems obvious, but very often not done, is dress as you would for an in-person interview. Really important. I realize on camera they can only see the top half of you, but it's important to make sure that you have your bottom half dressed as well, because you never know when you might have to suddenly get up from where you are to walk out and what gets caught on camera. So important that you are professionally dressed just as you would in person. So with that, I end my slides here. And next slide, please, and open it up to any questions that you might have. And like I mentioned earlier, if you could please tell me if you are at what level of experience, I'll try and make sure that I can customize my response to your where you are in your search.
Thanks, Sherry. That was awesome. All that information was so useful for me. I definitely still have an objective statement on my resume, so I will need to go look at that myself. Let's get into the first question. Let's see. It says, radiation protection is a heavily growing field. Any suggestions on where to get training in this area for a technician training?
Great question. So there are a lot of community colleges that do provide that. I might need a little bit more information as to which province or where you are currently based to truly answer that question. But if you go on Google and just look for any of the community colleges that provide for that curriculum, you will find that it is definitely a growing space. However, what I do know is that very often they may come from colleges that may have had an overall program, but don't necessarily have a specialization in radiation protection. As a new grad, when you come into that space, you learn, and very often it could be through internships and opportunities that you find within some of these. I would probably say that getting into a consulting environment in that space helps a lot because it provides you with hands-on experience there, and then from there on, you provide and start to grow your career in that space.
Thanks, Sherry. I'll also add is I think a good website to check out is maybe the Canadian Radiation Protection Association. They definitely will have more details on that.
Absolutely.
Our next question is, what is your advice for somebody with years of work experience in other fields like oil and gas who want to change careers and get into the nuclear field?
Great question. I'll say that from my experience with SNC-Lavalin, this was something that we saw quite a bit of. More and more organizations are far more open to that space. So one of the things that you look at now, depending on, like you saw within that space, I just need to understand if you're an engineer or if you're somebody, if you're saying oil and gas, and if you're a chemical engineer. There are certain areas within the nuclear space that does have that, and it's really important for you to be able to, again, network with the right individuals within that environment and talk about how they may have transitioned, especially if you see somebody on their profile, and look at how they may have transitioned their career as well. Starting to speak to those individuals might give you the leg up in finding ways of getting into that industry. If you work with an organization or with a company that was, let's say, in the consulting space and did that within oil and gas, finding, again, people that you have worked with that have now transitioned into nuclear and looking for that avenue in and channel in is another way for you to look at how you can start to put your foot in there. From a utilities perspective, certainly it is probably a little bit more challenging because if you didn't come out of that space, it's a little harder. There's definitely that space. But like I said, there's a lot more opportunities within the consulting services side. Hope that answers your question.
Let us know in the chat, anybody, if you want more details.
Please.
The next one is, what is your advice when you have gaps in your resume, about 5 years without a job, because you went back for education or moving to another country?
Oh, great piece. I think you kind of answered your own question there. It is about transparency and being clear about it without necessarily giving too much detail. You want to talk about, I think, again, employers are becoming far more considerate of the fact that we are human beings, that we have lives outside of work. And more employers understand that sometimes people take breaks for reasons outside of their control. It could be family situations and exigencies that you need to work on. So being transparent about that to say, I realize I have a break in that space. If your question is geared more from a space of how do I address it in my resume, you could actually put in a block of time. Now, if it is for education and you took a break for 4 years or 5 years for education, then it will be very obvious because you will have listed your education and you could put your timeline or your period of education. So from 2010 to 2015, let's say. When you do that, it becomes very obvious. We can trace back and see that on a resume. If asked during an interview or a phone screen, you want to be transparent to say, I took a bit of a break from my career for family exigencies or reasons that I needed to pay attention to. And what's important, though, is to talk about how you've kept yourself current through that period of time. Because we know that things change, technologies change, processes change. How have you been able to keep yourself current with that? Far easier when you've taken that break to go back to school because it talks about you upgrading a skill. But let's say it was because you had a family and you started off a family and you were taking care of the kids, or you decided to stay at home or that you newly came into the country. If you had that break, what did you utilize your time with that helped the employer see that you were productive in that space in upgrading and continuing to keep upgraded with what's happening?
Yeah, it's exactly everything you said. I think it's just important to give proper reasoning and show what you've been doing in that time as well.
Absolutely.
Our next question is, as a mid-level electrical engineer who has worked in automotive and oil and gas, I've worked with a variety of technologies. How would I highlight my transferable skills?
Sorry, I missed the first part of that. It broke up a bit.
Sorry, it's a mid-level electrical engineer who has worked in automotive, oil, and gas.
Okay, and you're looking to transition into nuclear. I think, again, I would say the same thing that I have in the past is when you've come from a manufacturing environment, you have seen a lot of what needs to be done within a nuclear, let's say, within the utilities space. And if you're in that space there and you are looking at those transferable skills. So really important is for you to highlight what about that skill set that you learned in that organization or that industry that you could utilize and leverage in this new space. For you to thoroughly understand that, again, it's important that you understand this new industry that you're trying to break into. The more you network, the more coffee chats you have with those that are currently in that space, it'll allow you to start to think of what are those transferable skills that they would actually value and what does that look like. So again, I take it back to saying you have to understand the industry you're stepping into and what is it about your skills that you see as abilities to bridge those.
Awesome.
Thank
and
you.
The next one is from April. She says, I'm in my final year at Ontario Tech for nuclear engineering. I was wondering if you have any advice for pursuing co-op positions or a new job. Is there specific sites or recommendations you may have?
Great. I would certainly say that your career center is the first space that you start with. A lot of employers will reach out to your career counseling centers and start to talk about where it is. One of the others that you can also look at as an avenue, and something that I would say is very successful, is look for professors that might be visiting faculty that may actually have some connections into industry themselves, and find those that might be willing to recommend you to those organizations that they may have come from or they may have consulted with. And that to you would be a great avenue of having a champion. I think what's important, especially as you're breaking out into the world of work, I will say, not just this industry, is to find a champion that can champion your cause for you. So having professors that make recommendations is invaluable, both to an employer as well as to yourself. Because as an employer, it means I take minimal risk when a professor is validating how strong of a performer you've been. So it's really important to find those channels. And of course, there are the regular channels that you would find is going on to companies that you have targeted, that you know often come on campus maybe even and find talent, and you want to start networking with recruiters in that space.
Thanks, Sherry. So We are running low on time here, and there's so many questions that are coming in. So thank you guys for your questions. That's awesome. Sherry, we'll try and maybe do 2 more. And then if you guys have any additional questions after the session, I would suggest emailing them to hello@ocni.ca, and then we'll forward them on to Sherry, and I'm sure she'll share her expertise.
I will be happy to, absolutely.
Thank you, that's awesome. Okay, so this is a good one. It says, I have 20 plus years of experience across a number of companies and industry. Should I include all of my former roles and experience?
Oh, great question. When you expand that little slide where, and hopefully you will be able to have access to these slides, you'll be able to get into more details of that. No, you don't have to include all of those 20 years, because 20 years ago, the kind of work that you did may not have any relevance anymore. So really important that maybe you highlight the most relevant ones. I would say the first or the last 10 years should be where you focus on, because that would be the most relevant experience that you will bring. The others you could put as a separate, instead of just saying your work experience, you can have a separate topic of it and call it other positions held, and just list what those positions are so that it looks like you have that 20 years of experience that you bring. So if in your professional summary you talk about a professional bringing in 20 plus years of experience, then you want to show where those 20 years are. So just break them apart so that somebody can see it, but you don't have to go into roles that are not completely in tandem with what you're applying for.
And okay, so I think our last question will be, what does the process look like to transition from nuclear in another country, for example, the US, to nuclear in Canada? What advice do you have for navigating that process? And they are currently a control room supervisor.
Okay, excellent. Wow. I think the biggest hurdle, if any, is about governance as far as Canadian legislation is concerned. But because you said US, I'll say that you are extremely marketable in Canada. One of the key pieces that, or the key talent pool for any recruiter is to now delve into the US market space, because the Canadian market space can be very dry of nuclear talent, and it is a hot hunting ground for us as the US. So very transferable, both the experience that you bring and the kind of plants that you may have worked in and managed, as well as the fact that from a legislative perspective or a governance perspective, there are great similarities in the North American market space. So you certainly have a much stronger chance of making that transition happen.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Alison Bradley, and I work for Ontario Power Generation as the Director of Asset and Project Management in our Eastern operations. So I'm very appreciative for the opportunity to speak at this event, and I hope that my story will influence your journey in a positive way. It definitely ties into some of the things that Sherry was talking about in the last presentation, so that was a good thing. As most of you know, a career is not a linear path. Some of it's planned, and some of it is seizing those opportunities that arise. So my presentation today will lead you through my education and career, as well as challenges that I faced and how I progressed to where I am today. So I will share my experiences with mentors and sponsoring other women in STEM, as well as highlighting the importance of being flexible in your career and enjoying that present role. So next slide, please. So I graduated from University of Windsor's Civil Engineering program, and I participated in a co-op where I worked for Ford Motor Company at their cast aluminum and research development facility. And during that time, I met Don Penrod, the plant manager, and he was my first mentor in the workplace. So during my second year of co-op, I was contemplating changing from a civil to a mechanical engineering program. And this move would have delayed my graduation by about a year, and it obviously would have cost money. So when I asked for his advice on it, he told me to continue on in my civil role. He said an education just proves that you can learn. And besides that, he was a civil engineer running an automotive facility. So he proved to be right in this advice. And I've been really blessed to work in the aerospace industry, nuclear for a very short stint, bomb disposal, safety equipment, and hydroelectric. So I never changed my major, and as I'm going to share with you today, I joined associations, I studied in other areas, I gained various certifications, I learned on the job, I networked. So if you don't have the exact degree for the job, then it is really important to find an association or obtain other credentials in the discipline or industry. So I consider that's your plan. Once you get the job, then you focus on learning all the practical experience and establishing that network. This work experience, a good track record, and people knowing who you are is a good start for opportunities to really start presenting themselves. So this is where that career moves off the linear path. So next slide, please. So since I had co-op terms in the automotive foundry business, I was able to obtain a position upon graduation at Haley Industries, which is an aerospace foundry in Ontario. And I loved the foundry business, and I worked with the American Foundrymen Society on various research groups, which further expanded that network. And it allowed me to continue to learn and lead innovation in the sand casting foundry business. At the time, I was the only female engineer at Haley, and they had only ever had one other female engineer there before. So it was a really male-dominated environment. I was told, actually, by one individual when I started, that I would get eaten alive and I would never survive. So those were basically fighting words for me. It made me dig in a lot harder and really learn that business. So 5 years in, I was actually asked to lead a new process control department and develop the org for them. So inevitably, the person who made that comment became a really great advocate for me. Actually got to know me through my work. And I'm going to touch on that point of positive interactions and a little bit about bias later on in my presentation. But I did spend about a decade in the foundry business. And it was around that point that I started to get curious about what else I could do. So I applied for a quality manager position at MedEng Systems, and I obtained the role since I actually had a process control background by that point. MedEng Systems manufactures personal protective equipment for the bomb disposal industry. And my first task there was being a quality manager, and I was to implement ISO 9001, a certified quality management system, and align it with their parent company. So I felt way out of my element, and I knew I needed to get some formal education or credentials to provide me with that framework to do those tasks. So I ended up studying the quality management body of knowledge through the American Society of Quality. And I passed that exam and became a certified quality manager. So the associations are really important, and those certifications when you're trying to get into the industry. So I actually have put a few associations on this slide. And these are associations that OPG has with these groups. So there is a Canadian Electricity Association, the Canadian Nuclear Association, we've got the Ontario Water Power Association, Canadian Nuclear Society. And then there's other ones at the bottom here which are more around project management and construction. So there are definitely ways to reach into the nuclear industry or the electrical industry, and it doesn't have to be specific to electrical or nuclear. So next slide, please. So after 5 years in the bomb disposal industry, I was getting restless again, and I applied into Ontario Power Generation. It was an individual contributor position in the asset management group, and I was able to obtain that role since I had the engineering education. I had a quality manager certification. I had a little bit of management experience and just really diverse experience in different industries. So, that resume and all those things really tied in well for moving into asset management. And as the engineering officer, I performed plant condition assessments at various hydroelectric sites, and I developed business cases to justify the investments for civil, mechanical, and electrical work. So it wasn't specific to my discipline. And as can be seen in the pictures, I went into the field. I performed inspections and provided technical advice on the condition of those assets. And this is really where the OPG practical experience and that network, because I was, in it kind of the grassroots, really helped to launch my career in that organization. And I think what I'm trying to say here is when you get into an industry, it's just dig in and really, really learn. It's great to get right into the field, gain those practical experiences. So those are actually pictures of me out in the field when I first started with OPG, and the one there, the bridge master that's kind of overhanging the dam, I'm actually on that. Someone took it from a distance, but I was on there doing some inspections. So next slide, please. So mentors is my next kind of topic here. I've had several mentors since joining OPG, and they were not formal, and I've never called them my mentor until now, really. I just worked alongside them, and I asked questions, and I listened. I modeled the behaviors that were authentic to who I was, and obviously not picking up on every behavior, but the ones that really spoke to me. My mentors varied in gender, age, race, religion, education, and definitely in position in the organization. The one thing I had in common, though, that they all had in common was their integrity and their care for me and their willingness to share their knowledge. So mentors are positive influencers, so it doesn't need to be formal, and it doesn't have to be a senior person in the organization. I sometimes think we look at mentors as they've got to be, 2 levels above us, or it has to be formal and documented. That is not the case. So my advice is to always look around your existing network and make those opportunities to interact with those people that you respect. And opening that door can be as simple as asking that person to review your work so that a conversation can actually start. And at this point in time, for those of you who might be looking for work that are listening to this, it might be asking someone to review your resume, using that LinkedIn and talking to somebody that you have a lot of respect for and ask them to look at it. And then you can really start to network with other people and build that resume. Next slide, please. So mentorship programs, this is the formal side of the mentoring. As my career evolved, I moved from asset management to projects, to production middle management, into supply chain senior management, and now into the asset and project director role. And I really have come to realize that it is important for me to mentor others as much as it is for me to learn from others. So I encourage those of you on the call today who have some experience that you're thinking about sponsoring somebody, could be formal or informal. I joined the Electricity Human Resource Canada Connected Women Mentorship Program, and I sponsored a young lady who was studying electrical engineering at Algonquin College. She was looking for some moral support while she completed her 3rd year. And I was able to connect her with electrical trade staff at the station I was working at, and they were able to give her tours and talk to her about the work that was available at OPG from the electrical standpoint. She graduated, and she actually did go on to do her engineering degree at the university level. So I highly recommend this program for people if you are looking for a connection into the electrical industry. It doesn't guarantee you're going to obtain a position in the industry, but it connects you with a mentor that is working in the actual industry. So next slide, please. So women in the hydroelectric industry is growing. In the last 5 years, there's been an increase in women in the senior leadership roles, both within my organization and other companies. And I speak about hydroelectric, but also on the nuclear side too. It's been a very positive sign, and as that headcount grows, the gender bias does decrease. So it is a slow movement. We can talk about it, and we can rally around it and jump up and down, but my personal opinion is that the only way bias changes is when someone has a positive interaction with whomever or whatever their bias actually is. So this is why a diverse workforce is so incredibly important. And the more encounters people have with talented, diverse people in the workplace, the more that bias will disappear. This movement will continue as long as all genders enroll into STEM programs and as long as we continue to promote STEM in the primary and secondary schools. And this can happen through co-op programs, providing school tours into the hydroelectric plants or into the nuclear plants, and volunteering to assist in the schools, among other things. So we need to pique young females' interest in the STEM subjects before they enter high school, so they are actually aware of STEM courses, including tech and drafting courses in grade 9 and the co-op classes that are available. If they aren't thinking of STEM in the first couple of years of high school, I really believe they won't have the right courses when they start to think about college and university in grade 11. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of one of the stations that I worked at, and some of the kids that had come to have a tour with us and the teachers. So during my time as a work center manager at Deswisha, I gave many tours to the local elementary and secondary schools, and we worked really closely with those schools to integrate grade 2 and 3 level science content. They do study electricity at that age, which is surprising. And they had a tour of the station, and we also built hydroelectric water wheels in small teams. So we also had 2 secondary school co-op students with us each semester. And they worked with our trades staff in their crews to gain practical experience before they went off to college or university. Unfortunately, I do have to say, I did not see a female student participate in that program, and this is why I truly believe we need to be starting really, really young in the primary grades with females, so that when they enter grade 9, they're actually interested in some tech classes and maybe the co-op program. Next slide, please. So your career plan. Although the diploma and degree are really important, I see my engineering degree as my baseline. And although many people stay in engineering, there are really so many other roles where engineering can actually take you. I was able to move away from core engineering work because I actually educated myself in whatever industry and role that I went into. And I did that through those associations and the certifications. I actually went back and did a college program. And it's really putting in that time outside of your work hours to ensure that you stay current in your existing role, as well as developing yourself for that next role. So I'm going to touch a little bit on career plan. It is incredibly important that you actually have a career plan that is short and long term, so that you can move forward. I encourage everyone on this call, if you don't have a career plan, you sit down and you write one. It is part of your career that is not about opportunities or chance. This is the calculated part that helps keep you on track. It's a live document that does change over time. Mine certainly has changed over the years. It needs to be shared with your manager and other people in the company so that they actually understand what it is you want to be, how willing you are to make that happen, and what they can actually do to help you get there. You should always be looking beyond your next role or position, just so that people know that there's more to you than just what's sitting right in front of you. So if you are currently looking for a job, it's really, really important that you have that career plan documented, and you share it with people in your network that are currently in the industry. Maybe it's something you put up on LinkedIn. There may be some gaps that you are not seeing as well. So if you have other people see it, they may actually help you with a few of the development opportunities, and it really could land you the job that you're trying to attain. So it's also during that review, if you ask people to have a look at your career plan, that they actually may have contacts or know of an interim position that could help you get to it. So next slide, please. So this is my last slide, but my advice to people is that are interested in new career opportunities within the electrical industry is you be really flexible on that position that you'll take to enter into the sector. I moved from a management position at MedEng Systems to an individual contributor when I first walked into OPG. What I needed was to get my foot in the door and prove myself. So joining electrical associations is a great way to make contacts and add that extra bit to your resume. Last but not least, you work on that resume, which Sherry talked quite a bit about in the last presentation, and make sure that it speaks to your to the organization that you're applying into. And Sherry talked a little bit there about LinkedIn. It really is a good avenue to connect with people in this industry. They might help you with the review of your resume or your career plan. And in summary, to me, a career is about your education, your career plans, your associations, continually learning, it never ends, certifications, gaining that real practical experience, mentorship, and the network. So part is planned, and the other part is being open to the opportunities and seizing them when they arise. So really be present in the moment in whatever role that you're in. Enjoy it, work hard at it. It is a unique career journey that is just yours. So really be present as you're in it, and don't always be looking kind of beyond as well. You wanna enjoy where you are as well today. So are there any questions for me?
Alison, we'll just give everybody a few minutes to send any questions in.
Okay.
Thank you for that presentation. That is awesome. Yeah. I can't believe you were helping dismantle bombs or creating the safety protection for it.
Yeah. I've done some pretty crazy things. It's very interesting path I went down.
Yeah, I think I've heard that too. It's just sort of like you were mentioning, what you're doing right now is not necessarily the exact career path that you're going to end up in, and that planning part is so important as an end goal kind of thing.
Yeah. I think I'm getting off easy if there's no questions.
Just as you said it, one came in actually. So we have a question from the audience that says, with such a varied career, do you think you have a next chapter?
Yeah, actually I do, because I have quite a career plan, but I am looking to move into executive eventually. That really is something that I've been looking at for a while. So my plan at this point is I do work in a region in hydroelectric, and I'd really love to be the VP over a region because it's quite diverse. So that is in the works, and what I'm doing on that is I'm looking at an executive MBA. So again, it's looking at certifications or associations that could get me to that other career. So, hope that answers it. But the career plan is really important because then you can see the dots of where you're going.
Oh, another one. Perfect. Let's see. How did the organizations you interviewed with view your willingness to take a demotion to learn the business? It says, greetings from a former Ford engineer from the Windsor Engineering.
Well, maybe we crossed paths. That's interesting. Yeah, so I think when I apply into any role, I take the elements of the other jobs and try to put them like Sherry was saying on that front page. So for me to be able to get into the electrical industry, it was the fact that I had a really broad perspective on other industries. I'd worked outside of civil. I'd worked in mechanical. I'd worked in somewhat in industrial engineering. And when you move into, for OPG anyways, asset management, you're doing justifications on a variety of systems, civil, mechanical, and electrical, and you're trying to develop business justifications on investing in those assets. So it really spoke to it. So really what I did was I looked, like Sherry has said, you look at that position that you're applying into, and you're like, okay, where are all those elements from where I've worked previously tie into that role? So yeah, I really put them on that page, and that got me the job for sure in OPG. Yeah.
Sort of pulled the best bits.
I did, yeah, and asset management is very broad, so they were looking for that.
We had another comment and question come in. It says, Alison is a wonderful leader, very inclusive and supportive, and I would like to ask her, how to navigate career moves that set you back as a necessary step to moving ahead.
Okay, repeat that for me.
So it's about how to navigate career moves that set you back as a necessary step to move ahead in the long run.
Yeah, so for me, it's I never looked at stepping back as stepping back. I think that's the first thing, have the feeling inside of it's where I'm going, right? It's sometimes you go to an individual contributor role, but is that really a step back? For me, I was getting into an industry and I was learning, and it was absolutely wonderful. It was like going back to school, really, for me. So it's having the right outlook on the position. That it's not always about moving up in an org chart. It's a bit of a jungle gym, right? You're kind of crossing over into another area, and you might have to go down because you got to learn that industry to build yourself up.
Exactly what you said. It's everybody. I think everybody's seen that picture where it says, what your plan is, and it looks like a straight line up and out. That's never really the case anymore, is it?
No.
Our next question is, how long did it take you to transition from civil to electrical?
Oh, okay. So I am not an electrical expert. Let's put that there right now. So for me, I look at civil and I'm like, that would be my expertise from like an engineering perspective. But bridging into the electrical industry, I am not an electrical engineer, right? So I rely on those experts to help me in the role that I'm in. So learning about hydroelectric in general, the business itself, not electrical engineering, I would say it took me probably 2 good years, but I was right in the trenches while I was doing that. I was inspecting the buildings and learning from other people around me, and I was doing all those business justifications. So I went and I worked with trade staff to learn from them because they really know. They really know the business. They really know the systems. So a couple of years, but it was right at the grassroots trying to learn.
Exactly like you said, kind of a ground up sort of reorienting.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Sorry about that. Technology. Thank you, Alicia. My name is Lyndsay Miller, and I do media relations here at Ontario Power Generation. And welcome to our last panel discussion for the conference. I've just got to say, I've been watching and listening to the wealth of talent and experienced women, speaking to various issues, and it's just been incredibly impressive. And I think it's something that we really need to do more of. So thank you to everyone who's participated, and especially the speakers and panelists. I am not going to mince too many words here because I have 2 wonderfully talented ladies here today who also love to speak quite a bit, as I've learned from our previous discussions. We have Starlene MacDonald, Manager of Organizational Development for Ontario Power Generation, and we have Michelle Branagan, CEO of Electricity Human Resources Canada, as our panelists for today. I will let them start their intros if they like. Starlene, did you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm hearing a little feedback, but I think that's probably normal. There we go. That's awesome. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. As Lyndsay mentioned, I do work here at Ontario Power Generation, and I come from I'm fairly, I guess, what you would call new to OPG as someone with less than 5 years of service. I've been here for about 4 years now, and prior to being with OPG, I worked for 10 years in healthcare and in the role of organizational development. Here at OPG, I've recently, within the last few years, have been working solely on our equity, diversity, and inclusion program. So I'm really happy to be part of this panel because I think what I'll be able to bring is to talk a little bit about the attributes of how equity, diversity, and inclusion really play a role with respect to leadership and some of the things that we're looking for and the changes that have happened kind of globally around this topic and how it's really impacted our views and competencies and how we want to develop develop people with respect to equity, diversity, and inclusion. So thank you for the introduction, and glad to be here.
Thank you, Starlene. Great to have you on the panel. And next we have Michelle. Michelle, did you want to give us a bit of an intro? Oh, Michelle, I think you're muted.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. I know. When technology goes against you, it's just, stops your heart for a minute or two. Good morning. I'll echo Starlene's thank yous for the invitation to be here today. Yes, I'm Michelle Branagan. I am the CEO of Electricity Human Resources Canada, or EHRC for short. For those on the call who don't know who we are or are not familiar with us, we are the only national electricity organization that really drives human resources and skills development for the sector. Our mandate is to look at the human resources challenges, the trends, look at the labor market intelligence, and really drive what needs to be done in regards to the Canadian electricity workforce. And our mission at the end of the day is to make sure that we have a workforce that is highly skilled, that is productive, of course, safe, and diverse. And that's a passion piece of mine, that whole diversity piece. I wish I could say that I grew up with the dream of being in the energy business, but the truth is I fell into the sector a little bit. I have a background in both project management and business development, and a master's in training and performance management. And having lived in Dublin, which is my hometown, and a number of other cities, I ended up in Ottawa and took a position with Electricity Human Resources Canada. I have been working in the industry for about 13 years now. I can't believe that. It still takes me by surprise. As I said, I didn't imagine coming into the sector. I have no technical ability, I'll tell you that right now, but it is a fascinating industry to work in, and there's such a variety of jobs and occupations in the sector that I think a lot of people are not necessarily always aware of. And so, of course, lots of opportunity for to bring more women into this industry in all types of roles. And we're all about trying to get that message across and showcase some of the opportunities that are there. And I would just say that with my background in mind is, you don't have to enter this industry having dreamed of being an electrical engineer since you were 5. That's wonderful if you did. That's fantastic. But not everybody knows what they want to be. Not everybody will have a technical background. There's lots of opportunities, so many avenues, particularly as our industry is in the midst of a lot of change right now with technology, with renewable energy and that type of thing. So lots of opportunities for folks to get involved.
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much, Michelle. That's fantastic. The goal today of the panel discussion is to look at, what HR human resource experts look for in candidates, teammates, and especially future leaders. And find out, what they see as opportunities that would make for good candidates, and how the entire sector can really benefit from seeing potential, especially in women. So with that, I'm going to get started on the first question for you both, and it's pretty timely. What are the most important attributes of a successful leader that you see today? And I'll let Starlene to take it away first.
Sure, yeah. So, again, I think to Michelle's point as well, leadership, especially now when we're talking about times where we're navigating leadership post-COVID and we're navigating leadership post-George Floyd, and this, the emphasis and the importance of things like connectedness, allyship, belonging. I think it's really, key that leaders now have attributes and have skills that align them with what it means to be an inclusive leader. And, inclusive leadership, there's a really great article that was written by Deloitte, and it talks about the 6 characteristics of inclusive leaders. So if you just Googled Deloitte's 6 characteristics of an inclusive leader or inclusive leadership traits, you'll find this article. And, one of the most important things I think that we can all be aware of, again, just, where we are today and kind of situating ourselves in the global society right now that we're in, is our cognizance and awareness of our own biases. Right? And I think as leaders, we have to be mindful of the choices we've made in the past, the things we've overlooked in the past, the things we may have missed as opportunities before. And that's everything from who we developed, how we promoted, the decisions we've made, who's been at the table. And, to me, if I'm looking for a leader now in this time where these things are so key and critical, I want to know that leaders have that awareness that that's an important thing right now. That's something that they can bring to the organization, because I think we really need that. I think organizations, we all really need that right now. They go on to list, many more attributes. Funny enough, they're all the letter C. So cognizance of bias, curiosity is another one. Again, none of us have all the answers. And by having a diverse team, an attribute of a good leader is building your team in such a way that you have diversity on that team, diversity of thought, diversity of industry, diversity of, introvert, extrovert, diversity of people, like differences of people and differences of opinion. The other is courage. Right? Because I think as leaders, we all have to have courage, because we're going to be probably going against the grain sometimes if we are strong thought leaders. Cultural awareness, commitment, collaboration, and then I added my own one to the end. I like to always add to these, and I kept it with the C's just to keep Deloitte's model in check. And I added communication, because I think every good leader has had the opportunity to learn best ways to communicate with people and most effective ways to communicate with people. And you have to tailor that. And I think an attribute of a good leader is to knowing how to get to the intended audience and how to navigate some communications and some messages when you need to. And, the other thing I would say is recognizing that we really have to recognize in ourselves where we are at along this journey and how that can impact our own development. We, as leaders, one of my most, one of the things that I was most open to as a leader was feedback. And really to get it right. So, those are a few. I won't continue to belabor, because I know Michelle has a few as well. But again, I would just reiterate the importance of looking around and seeing who's not at the table. And I think good leaders recognize that and then make sure that they extend those invitations to those folks as well.
I love that, Starlene, and I love that, because I think everybody has an inherent biases themselves, and sometimes it takes a little probing to find what your own biases are, right? And a lot of times people tend to hire or gravitate towards people who are reflective of their own personality, and so you have to guard against that when you want to make sure that you have all those different voices and opinions and perspectives around the table, right? I always say to folks when I'm looking to hire people, or they're part of my team, please feel free to disagree with me. That's what I want. I want somebody that can challenge me. And I think that's really important for a leader to recognize and to be humble enough to understand that they may not necessarily know everything. I know I certainly do not, especially with some of the new technology. I depend on my folks. We laugh about these sorts of things all the time. You have to know your own strengths and weaknesses and then bolster your team with those folks. You mentioned communications, and for me, oh my gosh, I think communication skills are so important for a good leader, and for anything within an organization, but especially leadership, because you really need to be able to motivate your teams. You need to be able to share with them how they are actually part of the bigger picture and how they actually contribute to the overall mission of the organization at the end of the day, right? And that means everybody in the organization, not just the senior leadership team, everybody, because I believe that everybody is important in the company, and a good leader needs to treat everybody with respect, regardless of title or where they are in the organization. And I think anyone who's wanting to go into a leadership role really does need to learn the communications piece, and it does not necessarily come naturally to everybody, right? It really is a skill set that needs to be worked on. Another trait I would say is, you need to be genuine. You need to be empathetic. You mentioned COVID times. I think that's particularly relevant right now, where people, particularly women, are trying to balance so many different things at the same time and be all things to all people and still get their work done and look after families or parents and that type of thing. You really need to pay attention to what's going on around you and be perceptive. And that sounds a little bit easier than it is, especially if you have a larger company. But you really need to make sure you're talking to folks throughout your organization. I've seen and spoken a lot of times to senior leaders over this year who are of the opinion that everything is fine in the organization and the staff are happy, etc. But I've then talked to other staff further down in the organization, and sometimes things are felt a little bit differently as you move down sort of the rank and file. We talked a little bit about knowing, that you don't know everything. Surround yourself with a good team. But at the end of the day, you need to be willing to listen to advice, but you also need to be prepared to make the hard decision. So the final decision at the end of the day is yours. So you need to own that, good or bad. And as a result of that, you have to be able to take responsibility for what happens under your watch and to admit your mistakes. I know I've certainly made mistakes along the way. Nobody has to be perfect. But if you want your people to trust and respect you and know that you have their best interests at heart, as well as the organization, they need to know that you won't throw them under the bus, right? I'm always a big believer in communicating that, it's okay to make a mistake. You can't be afraid of that failure, because that in itself will stifle the innovation of your people. And then I'll kind of just wrap it up with saying that, you also need to hire the right people. And as I said, you're not looking for a carbon copy of yourself, because sometimes we do tend to gravitate to people just like us, but you're trying to build leaders who are going to have their own minds, be able to lead in their own way, trust their own gut instinct. What you are hopefully doing is sharing your values as a leader, whatever those values may be. So, respect for those you work with, your ethics, your ability not to panic in strange situations, and leading by example. I think that's really important. And for me, again, removing ego from the equation is really important for our leaders as well.
That's great. Thank you. It's interesting, Michelle, you mentioned communications and the importance of communications in a leader, and it got me thinking back to, who I always viewed, having worked for various cabinet ministers at Queen's Park and chiefs of staff, who were the ones that stood out to me, or the ones I really respected, and they were always very strong communicators. They didn't believe in siloing their staff. We always worked together as a group. They always kept us in the know on anything that was going on, and they always wanted our feedback. So it was a very open, communicative environment, and I think that's so crucial, such a crucial characteristic to have in a leader. You also mentioned making mistakes and not being afraid to make mistakes, which I also think is very important and leads us into our next question around risk. So what do you see as, what was the most important risk that you took in your career and why? So perhaps, Starlene, if we could start with you.
Sure, yeah. First of all, I'll make a admission here and say that I'm not a great risk taker in my career. However, I have jumped from planes, I've skydived, I ride a motorcycle at high speeds, I'll go on the biggest, tallest roller coaster. Very risky in my personal life. But as it relates to careers, I tended in the past to kind of stay in one lane. And I think what I recognized was when I did take the risks to move into another lane, that's where things just opened up for me. And there's a graphic, you've probably seen it, and it's like the earth, and the core, the very central piece is your comfort zone, and then the next level around that is like the fear zone, and then the level just beyond that is the learning zone, and then the final layer is growth, right? And so I think in order to grow, we have to step out of that space of comfort. And for me, I think the biggest time that happened for me was actually moving from healthcare, where I had been for many years, to this industry, right? And so very different types of professionals, very different types of personalities, very different. As Michelle mentioned earlier, I have no technical ability whatsoever. My first degree is in social work. I just, it was a concern for me about, this is really risky. Like, am I making the right decision? I consulted with family and friends and had all of these initial thoughts about this could go really wrong. But looking back, it was a really important step to make, because I think, you realize and recognize that as part of that growth, you have to get out of that lane and sometimes move into another. And the best part of it is I brought all my skills with me, right? To Michelle's point, the energy industry needs people who are specialists in other areas besides engineering or, reactor safety or nuclear energy so we recognize that we all have our specialties in our professions and our transferable skills. And regardless of industry, my background in organizational development, employee engagement, supporting psychological safety, equity, diversity, and inclusion, I can carry them across sectors. And I think for me, once I got here, I recognized that it wasn't so risky after all, and that I was able to find a niche. But going back to Michelle's other point about communication, I had to learn how to communicate differently. So, in healthcare, oftentimes you're communicating to a group of people who, are basically valued in a caring profession and looking after other people. And there's a level of a way that we communicate with people in those industries. Whereas I found, technical, very succinct and, process-oriented type of communication was much more successful. So you still are a good communicator. You just have to learn how to tweak some of that along the way. So I think, I would say that was probably one of my biggest risks is just kind of moving industries. And for those of you who, I heard on one of the calls earlier are in manufacturing or in the automotive industry, do not think that this industry isn't something that you could be in, and there's places, like Michelle said, for many different skill sets that are transferable to move over into this industry. So we look forward, and I think we are looking for that type of difference in thought, because that can be really helpful as we start to innovate and grow the organization as well. Michelle, how about for you?
I was reflecting on this one last night, and maybe this job was one. I had a new baby at home, and I had just considered asking for a reduced work week. As a result, I came back when he was only 12 weeks old, and instead I took on the CEO role at this company, and all that entailed as a national organization. So a lot of travel involved with that as well too, and that was a big leap. As well. So that was probably one of the bigger risks. I have to say, we talk about communications. I have to tell you, I hated public speaking, and especially when I started in this role, and I think a lot of women will recognize this. Like, when I had to first speak, I would almost be sick the night before with the thought of having to do it. Now I've practiced and worked on it so much that it's become second nature. And even my husband has said, God, do you remember those days where I'd be trying to talk you off the ledge because you had to go out and present to 300 people the next day or whatever it was. So I think when you're going into a leadership role, or any role in your career, the whole communications piece, and start to your point, it's valid all the way through your career. You need to be able to communicate at all times, at no matter what level you're at. You need to be able to get your ideas heard, right? And especially when we're talking about DEI, and you want to ensure that you have a voice at the table, you need to be able to communicate and make sure that your voice is being listened to. And sometimes, it's that sort of fake it till you make it. I used to do that myself, and sometimes I still do it. I put on the lipstick and I just put on, okay, showtime. Okay, now I go. I do not love public speaking. I much prefer sort of being behind the scenes. And so for me, learning that communication piece was a challenge, but it was one of those pieces that I needed to do. On the other risk front, I came to Canada on my own. I was 19, didn't have much money in the pocket. I wasn't sure what I was going to end up doing here in Canada. Left behind a country and family that I loved, but I loved travel and I loved adventure, and there was simply no jobs in my country at the time. There was a huge, every kid on the street was basically moving to the US or Canada or Germany or Australia. But I do believe that if you are willing to work hard at any job, to do the best that you can, that will be seen and that opportunities will present themselves. And I like what Alison said in the previous session about being present in the job you're in. Even if you view that as a stepping stone, it's all about doing the best that you can do, taking challenges, taking those stretch assignments, taking those opportunities. Even if you don't think that you are 100% there yet, you'll figure it out. I think that's really important. Never be bound sort of by your own personal circumstances or your background or what you think you may or may not be able to do. If you have a growth mindset, you mentioned that, Star, I think if you can be successful.
And just to add to that point, Michelle, I think you touched on something that I think shows up in your report, and I know you might want to mention that later, but as women, we tend to feel like we can't go for that job until we check every box. And I think even if it said, nuclear experience would be an asset, we might look at that and go, oh, I don't have that, so I'm just not going to try. And I think it goes back to that point that you're saying exactly around, and again, I think this is where the research shows, I'm not just saying this as a stereotype or a generalization, but the research does show that men will apply for jobs based on the fact that they think they can do it or they know they can learn it, whereas women will wait until they have the skills, the knowledge, and the ability and have a few, months or years of practice before they will put their hat in the ring. So as women, let's stop doing that. Let's give ourselves some little bit more credit and say, you know what? We can do that. We've been in those situations before where we've proven that we've, been able to handle something new. And how different is it than learning any other new skill and having the confidence, like you said, to just go forward and give it a try.
Absolutely. Sometimes we're our own worst enemy. Whether it's wage negotiations where we tend to be a little bit more reticent in asking for what we feel that we deserve. Men have no such challenges along that front. And I've had a couple of women speak to me over the last couple of months, one younger in her career and one much senior in her career and in the industry a long time. And both were considering applying for jobs or promotions. And both of them were almost talking themselves out because they didn't tick one box. And whatever about the younger person I spoke to, I could understand, a little bit of coaching required there. For the person who was more senior, I'm like, oh my God, seriously, we've been talking about this a long time. Of course you can do it. It doesn't matter that you can't get 100%. Nobody that's going to be applying is going to hit 100%. Put your name in the ring, right? So we need to start looking at that and even encouraging our colleagues and our peers and our friends to go for those things, right? Again, it's all about pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, but I'm a big believer that, and I know when I'm always trying to develop my own staff, so on purpose, I will push them out of their comfort zone. And I've had a couple of staff, women who have hated public speaking, like myself, and I can totally empathize, of course. And so I make them public speak. I make them go out and do a presentation. I help them along, but they've got to get to do it. You've got to sometimes push people to take that chance, to take that risk, right?
And just to add to that, I think that's the other quality of a great leader is that they see the potential in you before you do. Right. So, you may have that fear, and fear of public speaking is, I think, second to death or heights or something. I think it's like on the top 3 list. So there's it's a pretty severe thing. But I think the fact that we can feel confident knowing that, hey, we see that in you, and we know that if you just had the opportunity to practice it, you could get there. That's really important to recognize. And I think it's again, it goes across. It's intersectional. So, sometimes we and I even just did it here in this example, is we recognize that, women may not always put their name in because, they don't feel that they're at this level. I think we also see that across different cultures too, in certain groups, and where there's this feeling of like I have to do things in a particular way, or it's very respectful not to challenge someone, in a position of hierarchy, especially as it relates to maybe pay or those types of things. So I think, it's things that can relate to many groups of people, and it can cut across many different intersections of people and diversity. And I think that's why when we make often advances for women, and we're very specific about women, we see gains in many other areas too, across different cultures, across different, subsets of those intersectionalities of diversity. So another point just to kind of recognize how that some of these gains can work well for many people, like, from many different areas.
Absolutely. And we've developed, and I know OPG were one of the founding signatories of our leadership accord on gender diversity, and the whole idea, without going into too much detail on that, the whole idea was to have organizations, to have leaders sign on to really push for the integration and support of women in the industry, right, in their organizations, to help them to come into the industry and then stay in the organization once they get there, because there's two different things. But that whole piece, even though that is on gender diversity, that has really opened up the conversation for those other underrepresented groups, because organizations are looking, we need to, how many Indigenous people have we got working with us? How many women of color have we got working for us? And how are we supporting those, or people with disabilities, whatever, all those underrepresented groups? We really need to open up the dialogue and not be afraid to have some of those conversations, right? So, of course, some of the societal things that are happening over the last couple of years, Black Lives Matter, the Me Too conversation, have really pushed these to the forefront, which I think is fantastic, because I think we've been talking about some of these changes for a long, long time, and the pace of change is just being way too slow, right? So,
great discussion. Some fantastic points being made, and certainly I can speak to being guilty of undermining my skill set. And again, before coming to OPG 2 years ago, I had zero knowledge of the energy sector. I worked at Queen's Park for various ministers and a premier, and it was communications based. And I have to say that the Ministry of Energy was the one area that I avoided like the plague, because I just was so overwhelmed by it. They were talking in a different language, so many acronyms being thrown everywhere. It was just a blur. So I applied for this job along with several others and thought nothing of it. I thought, I don't have that experience in the energy sector. And I got a call back, and, I ended up, thank goodness, getting this job. But I think it was based on the fact that, don't undermine your skill set. I like to think I'm a good problem solver, I'm a good communicator, and those things are wide reaching, and they apply to so many different jobs. So I completely agree with you. Don't sell yourself short, and don't be afraid to take, those risks and try new things. And certainly I know a few other ladies out here would definitely agree with that.
And we do a lot of research on this area, and we looked at not just on the gender diversity piece. We've done a ton of work on that, and Star just referenced one of the reports that we've just done looking at women in leadership in the industry. What we found some of the challenges were, but in relation to that, it's when we talk to employers, what we're constantly hearing from them is it's not just all about the technical skill set, right? So that's easily. You can tell somebody has an electrical engineering degree, or whatever it is they may be, or they've got their ticket if they're in the trades, or as a technician. That's easy to see. But it is those what we call professional skills. They used to be called soft skills. They're anything but soft, right? Yeah. And that's what employers are telling us again and again and again are so important. So again, communication skills, the ability, teamwork, work ethic, all of those types of things. A lot of those that women in the industry may be really good at, but may not necessarily make the connection as to how important they are as they navigate their career, right?
No, absolutely, absolutely. I could talk all day about this, but we do need to get going on to our other questions. We do have some questions from some of the participants, viewers. Our next question is also very timely and leads into our previous. How do you continue to grow and develop as a leader? Starlene, did you want to take
Sure,
that one?
yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you know, you have to be a continuous learner all the time, right? You have to really recognize that we always have room to make space for learning new things and growth. For me, I'm a perpetual learner. I keep telling my husband that I'm done. I'm not going to do anything more. You know, when I finished my master's, I said, okay, this time I'm not like I had an idea. I was going to go on and do my PhD, and then I had a child, so it kind of put a damper to that. But I've since then I've gone on and done certifications. I've done online courses. I've done, you know, I think growth is huge and learning is a huge part of that. And I find when I'm not in a course, I start to have like withdrawals, and this is the time of year I have it. So I finished my certification on being an inclusive leader. That's through Centennial College. I did that certification recently, probably about a year ago now, and it's been like 9 months. And this time of the year when school supplies are out, I start to get like, ooh, I need to go take a course. I need to buy new notebooks and pens and pencils because I just have that need to kind of fill my brain with new information. You know, feedback is another avenue. And again, I mentioned that earlier. The good leaders are always looking for feedback. I think that's the most important gift that you can give yourself is the gift of receiving feedback and how you take that feedback well, because that's, you know, if you've ever heard of the Johari window, it's kind of the concept that there's the way you perceive yourself, then there's the way, you know, you're perceived to others, and then the way others perceive you and how you perceive yourself to the world. And depending on what pain you're looking through, there's a real difference. And sometimes I think, you know, I'm putting myself in a certain light, and in talking to people, I'm recognizing that maybe they didn't receive it in that way. So I think being open to that feedback is another way as someone you can kind of continuously learn, grow, and develop. And then I would also say align yourself to not just mentors and sponsors that can help you and support your navigation, but become a part of a community of practice in some way, you know, like join those groups, be part of those efforts, because it does, you know, to the points earlier around networking that were a part of this morning's conversation, you know, building networks and leaning into the people who do similar work but in completely different industries and understanding, you know, what are the new and interesting things they're doing can really align with your ability to continuously look at ways to further develop those. And I think you have, you know, so I've been on many of these calls where I've just had those moments where I'm thinking, oh my God, why didn't I think of that? What a great opportunity. So, you know, take the time to, you know, even do some of the internal work. That's probably your best bet. There's a few things I would recommend as part of self-assessment even, you know, taking an opportunity to do what's called the IAT, and that is a online test through Harvard that tells you your biases. So if you have, it's called the Implicit Association Bias Test. So the IAT, you know, go in, Google it, and you can discover some of your own biases on there. Again, a way to grow and learn and recognize that we know that if we have a brain, we have bias. And so if we can know where those biases are, we can navigate differently around that. So, you know, I know as a person from the East Coast, and if I were to meet someone or interview someone or develop someone and they're on my team and they happen to also be from Cape Breton and maybe they ride a motorcycle too, am I biased kind of going after that person to grow and develop that person because I see myself, as we talked about earlier, represented in that person? Or, you know, think about growth and development as a way to go after the people you don't know, right? And I call that the know and grow approach. Look for the people who aren't obviously the ones that stand out, and take the opportunity to learn and get to know and recognize. And you will learn something from yourself as you help develop those people that, you know, aren't the same as you, I guarantee. I once hired somebody on my team who was very technical. It was really hard for me because I'm a people person. I'm not a technical person. And, you know, I felt it was a little risky because I do typically hire people that I feel like I'm going to have a good, and he was very quiet. He was an introvert. And I was like, oh, this is going to be, and you know what? It was different, but boy, did he teach me a lot. And did I need him on my team more than you can imagine. So, you know, I think we learn through those processes as we grow and develop when we surround ourselves with people that are different. And knowing some of that and how we can impact that through something like taking an implicit bias test is a good way just to become more self-aware.
I love that, Starlene. I'm like, okay, what am I going to say after that? The mentor and sponsorship piece is so important, because if you have a mentor, somebody that you can chat about, particularly if you start running into some challenges or issues or things you're not quite sure on how to approach, or maybe you have a very set thought as to how you're going to approach it. Sometimes it's very good to have somebody who's in your corner, whose opinion you'll respect, but will sometimes disagree with you, right? Again, it comes to that. You don't want to, you want to have that sounding board, but you don't want it just to be reflective of your own thought process. You need somebody that will challenge you and perhaps be able to give you some advice. So that's really important. That test that you talk about, Starlene, my team have done that as well over time. It's really interesting. People come out of that sometimes quite shocked as to what the results have been. So I think that's a really good recommendation for folks. I've talked a little bit about this, and you're talking about growing and developing as a leader. Again, I just keep saying, get out of your comfort zone. You need to be willing to take a chance, and I'm probably going to say risk a lot today, but if you are going to be a leader, then you cannot be afraid of failure. I think that's really important to recognize. You're going to learn by making mistakes. You're going to grow by making mistakes. I know I have. I've done things in the past as a leader that I wouldn't do. The big thing is not to keep making those same mistakes over and over again, and then then there's real challenges for you as an individual. But I've done things in the past. I can think of one from a number of years ago in one of the jobs I had, where I kept somebody on longer on the team than I should have. And I spent a considerable amount of time trying to develop that person's skill set and their competence. And while I realized that, the people and the rest of the team were getting sort of frustrated, I didn't realize how much it was impacting them and contributing to, a negativity in that team. So you have to learn from your mistakes, and it would really be willing to have sometimes hard conversations. That's how you grow. Starlene mentioned the leadership resource, so quick plug for that. So this was a body of work that we did where we looked at leadership pathways to gender equity, because we wanted to look at the number of women on boards and in senior leadership teams in the electricity sector, knowing that the numbers were incredibly low. In our industry right now, we do have about 26% working in the sector, and in the trades, it's much lower. It's under 7%. And that's very much reflected as well in the senior leadership teams, right? So we know those are the challenges. We know there's great opportunities in the industry. What do we do about it? Well, one of the things that we saw was that while sometimes male managers are hesitant to take action on gender issues for a number of reasons, about 1/3 of our respondents to that research also said that they themselves as women avoid supporting gender equity initiatives because they don't want to be seen as being labeled, right? So, and some of the type of things that we heard back was, I don't want to be labeled if I push too hard. I don't want to be, that bra-burning feminist. I don't want to get that backlash or that reputation. I don't want to be singled out, and particularly at the beginning of a career, until you have a little bit of experience behind you, sometimes people feel pressure to sort of stay quiet, right? And as one lady that responded said, that's a ridiculous way to live, and she said, I need to stand up for my rights and the rights of my daughters. So we ourselves need to, as leaders, really keep that in mind and really look, as we grow and develop as leaders, to also sort of pay that forward, as it were, and really try and be an example of what a good leader is, right? Because everybody knows at the end of the day, the reason that most people leave an organization is it's not usually because of salary. It's because of the person that they are working for. It's because of their leader, their manager, whoever it may be, right? So it's really important that you get that right. On the mentorship piece and the networking piece, I know we talked a little bit about that earlier this morning. You know, I read a great quote last week. I have to say, I'm not a poet. I found this in a book that was in a friend's house. But it was Emily Dickinson, the poet, and she said, "My friends are my estate." So when it comes to networking and growing as a leader, I would say go and build some real estate. You know, go connect with people that you respect, that are going to support your goals, that are going to be frank and open with you and give you the feedback to help you grow as a leader, whether you like it or not. Again, it goes back to being able to listen to others.
Oh, great feedback. And it certainly speaks to a question that one of our listeners has, and I'm wondering if perhaps you and Starlene can maybe elaborate a little further. As executives, can you share how you figured out who could be your mentor on your way up the ladder? Do you have a specific example of someone that you really, or approach that you took to really, you know, get that opportunity, to get that mentorship, and how did you actually break that ice? You know, it can be a little awkward. Will you be my mentor? You know, how do you approach that? And if you could give any examples that you have, that would be fantastic. And Starlene, if you want to add in.
Yeah, sure. No, when I came here to OPG, I had a few encounters with one particular leader, extensive background in this industry, and was a little intimidating to me, just because of how much knowledge and power that he had, and just the respect that he had from people. And I'd only had one or two interactions with him, and it was after the second interaction that I just decided to, you know, take the risk and say, you know, look, you know, I've and it's because he coached me on something, and how it happened was, where I came from, it was a mental health hospital, and one of our taglines is about hope, right? Like, we inspire hope. And I said something in the meeting related to hope, and it was very quickly corrected. And for those of you in nuclear, you're probably giggling, but it was basically, we don't work on hope here. We work on plans, right? Like, we execute, we don't hope. And I totally get it, because it's, you know, but in that moment, I was just like, oh, dummy, like, you screwed up again. And it was at that moment that I said, you know, I could use this opportunity and, like, crawl into a shell right now and, you know, put my tail between my legs and walk away and take the coaching. But I waited till after the meeting, and I said, you know, that coaching, it really, you know, hit home for me, and I realize I'm in a new industry, and you know, you've been in this industry a long time, and I would love to ask, like, would you mind doing more of this for me? Like, would you mind taking an opportunity to support and coach? And it was also somebody I wanted to align myself with, because, again, a very respected leader in the organization. So I think sometimes, you know, even in different situations and circumstances that can come up, use those as ways to kind of, you know, advance some of your own goals, and look to those people to ask for that help and support. And most times you'll get a positive response, because I think there's a lot of people that their ego is a little flattered that you've reached out to them to ask them to be a mentor or a coach. And I think that's important, that we recognize that we need that, and we need that support, and we would love to have it from this person. And so it worked out really well. And you know, luckily in that case, it had a positive outcome. So I think sometimes you just got to go for it. You just got to reach out and go for it, for sure. Michelle, how about for you?
I would say, you know, I don't think I've ever had a formal mentorship, which is funny, because we run a formal mentorship program. It's one of the things I developed a number of years ago for this industry. But mine have tended to be more organic, and I can remember, I think of 3 people right now that I consider them my mentors. I go to them, I ask them to challenge me. If I have questions, I'm not quite sure, I need advice, they're the people that I go to. They're my go-to. It was very funny. I had somebody else last year who's in this industry, and she actually came up and thanked me for being her mentor. And I said, I thought you were my mentor. So the two of us, because we had such a good support network, and we were always looking to support each other, and we would call each other or help or whatever it may be, we both considered ourselves in that sort of mentorship, you know, the other side of the equation, which is fantastic. But when I was in my late 20s, probably similar, Star, like I was working, and within the Irish government, actually, organization, and working with a lot of engineers, and my manager at the time was very supportive of what I was doing. And again, it goes to doing the best work that you can do. If you can, you need to work hard to get ahead, right? I'm a big believer in that. You have to demonstrate, and that will propel you. People will see that, and they will, and they'll sort of help take ownership of your career, as it were. And he was a fantastic mentor, pushed me to get my master's, and was just somebody that I really appreciated his advice and guidance over the years. And really, when I said, oh, I don't know if I can do that, he was the one that really pushed me out of my comfort zone. So again, they've been a little bit organic, but I will say for anyone who is looking to be a mentor or a mentee, as a mentee, you need to own that relationship. You need to be pushing and asking for help, asking for support. That needs to be owned by you. I always challenge women when I talk about this, because I talk to a lot of us in the industry who are so incredibly busy trying to do the work, trying to manage home life, do everything. They all want to pay it forward, and they all want to do something, but a lot of times it ends up, I'll say, well, have you signed on yet? Have you picked somebody to mentor yet? Oh, I haven't had time. I've been too busy. So I always challenge women that, just even if it's taking somebody for a cup of coffee or just spending a half an hour. I've been doing some phone conversations with folks who feed me at these types of events, particularly students from our local universities. And I always just try and take that half an hour to have that discussion. It's not a long mentorship program, but it's just the opportunity just to talk about, okay, what are you thinking? Where are you going with your career? What have you done? What are you doing for networking? Have you applied? What's holding you back? Those types of things. It's all about trying to pay it forward and to support that whole next generation. And yes, we're all busy, but I just think if all of us just make that little bit of time to try and do that, we will really start changing things much, much, much quicker, because the whole idea is that everybody should always have that mentality to move things forward.
Great answer. We've got about 5 minutes left. As I said, these two ladies love to talk, which is fantastic, and so much great feedback and advice being provided. I think one of maybe the last questions we could end with is specifically focused on some of the younger listeners we have today and viewers, that are still trying to figure out their career path, and want to get to that executive leadership level. What is your final bit of advice that you could impart, any sort of wisdom onto those individuals, to these women here today? Starlene, I'll let you go first.
I was going to say, why don't we let Michelle go first on this one?
Okay,
I think there's some really good stuff out of that report that you could probably get in there too, Michelle. So I'll let you take this one, and then I'll follow up.
Well, I would say for young people who are starting off, you have to work hard. There's no easy journey to the top at the end of the day, right? Take risks, learn from your mistakes, and don't feel like you have to be perfect. Again, we talked a little bit about that. That's really important. We've talked about the value of networking, and you need to get out there and engage, right? And that's a skill in and of itself. And as I said, I can't count the number of people who are articulate, confident, and educated in their field who are still incredibly nervous about going into a crowded room where they know nobody. You have to be able to do that. It is a skill set. It takes practice. I don't care if you do it in the mirror or you do it with your parents or your significant other. That's really important. And I would say it's really important to develop your own style. And there's a lot of literature on this about women trying to fit in, particularly into male-dominated industries or where there's a lot of men traditionally. But you don't have to become one of the boys, right? Women, I think, have been doing this for a long period of time. You need to develop your own style and your own way of being a leader. That's really important. Don't be intimidated. Don't apologize for your ideas. A lot of women, particularly in their career, I did it for a long time where I would just, they apologize for their idea. Oh, sorry, can I just get in here? Or even in an email, even until a few years ago, I was putting just wanted to reach out.
I'm guilty of that.
just wanted to do. And I went to something like this, and I'm like, I still do that. And this was only up to about 3 years ago. So sometimes we have to catch our own barriers, right? Don't apologize for whatever it is you're asking for or you are communicating. And then finally, like I said, it's all about confidence, right? Getting ahead. You know your own worth at the end of the day. You do not have to know everything. Just be good at what it is that you do. Pick your passion and go for it, right? And you'll get there. You'll get there.
Yeah, I think you summed it up well. And with 2 minutes left, I would say ditto to all of that. And just on that last note, Michelle, around our paths change, right? And I think one of the things that I would give advice to people a lot. I often went and talked at colleges to HR students and things of that nature. And what I would say, and some may disagree with this advice, but it's something that served me well, is intuitively what your values are. And you need to find a career and a role that's aligned with those values because, I tried to be, a director of HR and do labor relations and, have to lay people off and do the firing and all the things associated with being a leader in HR. And I did that for 2 years and I lost sleep, right? Because it didn't align with my core values. And I found myself not doing well in certain parts of my job and excelling at others because I would procrastinate the stuff I hated to do and just focus on the things I really enjoyed doing, which didn't make me a great leader at the end of the day. And so I think where that you're working in an area where you're butting up against some of those things that really just don't align with your values, be conscious and recognize how that, because it translates in your body. You feel it. You don't sleep. You end up, probably having some level of anxiety. You could physically get sick, and recognize that early on, because sometimes we get into a career where we think this is what we want. I thought, first I thought social work, and then I thought HR, and then I went, you know what? There's parts of HR where I can only do organizational development and employee engagement. And I didn't even know this was a career option for me. And then so I moved there. So yeah, my diploma looks a little funny around that, that career path. But what it taught me was I got into the career now that I feel is most aligned with the things that are who I am, elevating people, supporting people, working with people to bring them to their best self, and supporting programs that offer leadership, mentorship. I love to see and be part of those types of initiatives. And I think if we know that early in our career, we can really find, the best place that we can be a little bit sooner than I did, by the time I reached the point where I recognized it in myself. So that would be my final advice, I think.
Fantastic. Well, Starlene and Michelle, thank you so much for being our panelists today on this very important and timely discussion around leadership, around not selling yourself short, about being open to new opportunities, taking those risks. I've certainly learned so much within this last hour, and also was able to realize my own strengths and weaknesses, things through your responses, things that I should work on that, or I've got this skill set, why am I not amplifying that in my career? So thank you very much. I'm going to throw it back over to Alicia for closing remarks, if you have any.
Thank you.
Oh, hi everyone. Actually, I'm just going to take over for Alicia for a moment. She's done an amazing job all day today, but I thought I'd just close off today's event as a whole. And thank you to all of our speakers and our moderators for just taking time out of your busy schedules. We forget that not only are you doing your own jobs, but you're also doing everything else that you're supposed to be doing whilst you're working from home. So thank you for all of that. Thank you to all of our speakers and our participants for sharing their personal stories, resources, and lots of details on their experiences and basically how to navigate this sector being a woman. I like to say She Leads might have been a micro conference, but the conversations have been huge.